All right, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Dr. Albert Gallatin Harper, but most folks around here just call me Dr. Burke. My ancestors were Quakers that settled in the Pennsylvania area, and sometime in the 1700s, my grandfather, Robert Harper, began migrating southward, going through the Virginia and through the Carolinas, and eventually staying in Georgia, where my father, Samuel Burgess Harper, was born in 1796. In the early 1820s, my father and family moved westward to LaGrange, Tennessee, where he served as a time as sheriff there, and reportedly had close ties to Davy Crockett, who was a pretty famous guy from Tennessee back then. It was in LaGrange that I was born in 1830. When I was about 18, the family, like so many of Americans, moved westward, and we moved to what is now known as Magnolia, Arkansas. My mother named the town Magnolia, and if you'll notice on a number of Harper tombstones, you'll see headstones, you'll see magnolia blossoms engraved on them, so it was a big deal for the family. Not long afterward, my father purchased a plantation in Flat Lick, Louisiana, which is about 11 miles north of here, and the family moved there. He died in 1853 and was one of the first persons buried in this cemetery, and he's buried up under that magnolia tree along with my mother, who died in 1887, and my first wife. In his will, he left me quite a bit of property, his gold watch, and the rest of the estate was divided between myself and my three brothers and three sisters. When the Civil War broke out, I was commissioned a second lieutenant and served with the Louisiana Cavalry unit, but was captured by Union forces near Brownsville, Mississippi, which is between Vicksburg and Jackson, in 1862, and I was sent to a POW camp in Ohio. But fortunately, within the year, I was returned to the Vicksburg area and released in a POW exchange program, upon which I returned to Minden to serve with the Minden Rangers of the Louisiana Volunteers. At the conclusion of the war, I attended the Tulane Medical School, where I obtained my MD degree, and returned to Minden to establish my practice. And incidentally, my other three brothers were also medical doctors. I was married 3 times. My first wife, as I mentioned, buried up there, Nanny Hammeter, died of childbirth along with our first child, and that was in about 1860. In about 1862, I married Geraldine Knuckles, and with Geraldine had 5 children, though we lost one of those to childbirth. And in 1872, she passed away, leaving me with the small children in a medical practice, so I, within the year, had remarried to her younger sister, Leisha. And with Leisha, had 6 more children. So we had a house full of kids. We lived at the corner of the Germantown and Homer Road, and it was a wonderful, busy place in Minden. There was a lot of activity at the crossroads, and as you can imagine, with 10 kids, a commotion they could get into in the house, and when they did, oftentimes Leisha would sit down at the piano and I'd get out my fiddle, and we'd play songs that would calm the kids down, and a couple of their favorites were Old Dan Tucker and the Arkansas Traveler. I was also very proud that all of my daughters were able to attend the Minden Female College, which was the only women's college west of the Mississippi after the Civil War at the time. I was also active in politics. In 1871, Webster Parish was formed by carpetbaggers, taking portions of Bienville, Bossier, and Claiborne parishes, and they formed Webster. And I was elected the first coroner of the parish. I was elected the first clerk of court of the parish, and was also the first treasurer of the police jury of the parish. But for the most part, I was just a country doctor, and I made house calls, my horse and buggy, all over the parish. And as a matter of fact, every evening when I would come in, they would always saddle a fresh horse for me, and then I was called out at night to deliver a baby or set a broken bone or something like that. The stress and the strain of the war and too many cold, sleepless nights in the saddle took their toll on me, and I died in January of 1891 and buried here. Alicia carried on well, raising the 9 children that were still at home and doing very, very well. Though she could have done better had she collected any of the monies owed to me at the time of my death. But not long afterwards, she moved to Shreveport, where she raised the children, and she lived at Park Place, which is on top of the Fairfield Hill. And she was referred to by the neighbors as General Harper because they said she sat on the back porch and ruled the hill. She joined me on the other side when she died in 1925 and was buried here next to me. My real name is Mike Harper, and Dr. Bird is my great-grandfather. And again, we thank y'all for being here.
Good morning, I'm Rutledge. Well, Dr. Rutledge C. Tompkins, if you will. I was born in Minden. I'm not correction. I need to introduce my wife here.
I'm Alma. Hi.
Hi.
I was born in January 1877 here in Minden. My father, a druggist, though he preferred apothecary, came to Minden from Lake Providence. During the war between the states, he moved up here from an area that he lived in most of his life to get away from the fighting.
Now, Rutledge, they don't need to know all about your family history.
I was getting to that. Anyway, I lived around medicine all my life, so I decided to become a doctor. First time I really left Minden, I went all the way to Washington, D.C., to attend college. I stayed with a Carroll family up there who was from Minden. And they were living up there while Mr. Carroll was working for the government. And I got to see a little bit of the world while I was there. But when I graduated, I came back to Minden to become a doctor.
That was right before we got married. I'm not from Minden. I'm from Avoyles Parish. I'm from Marksville. I was in Edwards. You might know some of my relatives. As a matter of fact, one of my cousins was very prominent here in the state of Louisiana. You might recall Edwin. Well, he's in jail now. But, you know, he's a younger cousin of mine and very distant. We got married in 1917. That was about the time that Rutledge joined the Great War and became an Army doctor. Well, when he left, it was pretty rough on me. We had 2 daughters, and I was expecting our son, Rutledge Jr.
Well, I had done my part as an Army doctor. And, you know, this day, in 1918, was a very important day. That's the day the armistice was signed. And I got to come home with my wife and children. About that time, I decided that I wanted to do more in medical besides just private practice. So we moved down to Pineville, and I worked at the state hospital for over 10 years. But we got a chance to come back to Minden when I was accepted a job as a parish health officer. I held that job for over 20 years until I came up here to stay.
I taught the piano for years. My family loved music. I had 3 sisters who also taught music. But I was the best piano teacher in Minden. I taught a lot of children. It was a wonderful life. Thank you for coming.
Hello, I have a name, but it has been lost forever. I am one of the many buried in this cemetery that lost their markers in 1933. You can see all the large spaces without markers in front of you. On May 1st, 1993 at 4 o'clock p.m., the most deadly tornado in history occurred in Louisiana history, occurred in Minden, where 28 people were killed and 400 injured. Here are some pictures over here that show the tornado hit Minden. This tornado was estimated to have the strength of a modern-day F3 storm, 0 being the least and 5 being the worst. Officially, more than $1.2 million in damage was caused. Over 500 homes were damaged or destroyed, along with many businesses. This disaster of 1933 plunged Minden into the Great Depression as unemployment soared in our city. So as you look around today, remember that there are more of us here. Thank you for visiting my unknown grave.
Hello. It's good to see you visitors out today. And actually, I was looking for my husband, the Major. He seems to have been called away, but that's not unusual. So I guess I'll have to share the story with you. I'm Elizabeth Bryan Hamilton of the Amelia County, Virginia Hamiltons. How I got to Minden is an interesting story. But seeing that we're honoring the soldiers today, I'll have to tell you about the Major. Everyone calls him Major Hamilton, but his name is William Hamilton. And you know, he really was a colonel, not a major. You know, you've been hearing about all the recent wars, but he fought in the wars very, very far away in 1813 and 1814. And of course, he wasn't my major at the time. He was still married to my late sister, Mary. She passed away in 1828, and we married a year later in 1829. Anyway, back to the story. My major fought in part of the War of 1812 in Georgia, called the Creek War down in Georgia. Oh, I forgot to tell you, the Bryans and the Hamiltons moved to Hancock County, Georgia. But the major was actually a colonel on the staff of the famous General David Blackshear during that Creek War. Now, some people said that the major got that job because he was the brother-in-law of General Blackshear, but that's not true. He was a very brave soldier. After my sister died, the major and I got married and began rearing a family back in Georgia. But quite a few of our family moved west to Louisiana. My stepson or nephew, I'm not quite sure what to call him, David Blackshear Hamilton, he became a doctor and moved here to Minden. Did quite well, built a fine home. In fact, it's still here. It's the McIntyre. Oh, wait, I forgot how time changes things. It's the home of Dr. Daniel and his family. Eventually, more of the children moved out here, and our daughter Elizabeth's husband passed away. She married Calvin Leary, who owned the Sunnyside Plantation. Oops, there I go again. You know it as the Shadow Place down in Beverly. With so many of the children and grandchildren living here, David's daughter, she married John McIntyre. That's how the house became the McIntyre house. The major and I decided to move out here and let the children take care of us, particularly after the times got so rough in Georgia during the War of Northern Aggression. So we moved in with David and lived our last days here. The major died in 1870, and I joined him up here in 1875. So that's how we two Virginians ended up here in Minden. I'd hoped the major might make it back here in time, but it looks like he won't, and I know you need to move on and visit other graves. So thank you for coming. I'm Marion Creighton, and these are my sons, George and William. I was born in 1820 in Scotland. I might not have been in such a hurry to come to America had I known all of the tragedies that would be a part of my life here.
but I married Peter Creighton in Georgia, and we moved about 10 years before the Civil War to Minden, and we were very happy before the war in Minden. We lived in a lovely house on East and West Street. We had 8 children. My husband was a city planner. He helped to build some of the buildings that still remain in Minden today. But eventually, that dreaded Civil War did begin, and my husband, who was 51 at the time, and 4 of our boys enlisted in the Confederacy. My 2 sons will tell you of their experiences.
Mama, you know how much we wanted to go and join up and fight with our neighbors and take a part. I remember how disappointed I was in April of '61 when my brother William went off to join the Minden Blues. We moved to Homer by then, but he went back to Minden to fight with his friends. Me being the older one, I felt like I should have gone. But in July, I was ready. I went to Virginia. I missed the Battle of Manassas, but by August, I'd settled into camp. Never did get to fight those Yankees, though. I started to feel sick, and I came down with a fever. They took me over to Miss Johnson's house, and I died there in September 1861. You know, it took me a long time to figure out how I got back to Minden. William, you want to tell him about that?
Well, I'll get to that. Since I did get to fight, let me tell my story. Like George says, I left with the Blues in April of '61, and we were fighting in the Army of Northern Virginia under General Beauregard. And it was in Manassas that we found out that those pretty blue uniforms that them ladies in Minden made for us weren't such a great idea. You see, they got us shot at by our own men. But we won that battle in Manassas. We licked them good. About that time that old George came down and, well, he got sick, like he said, and he ended up passing away. And whoever heard of a boy from Louisiana coming to Virginia and getting swamp fever anyways? Well, later on in '62, I went down to Shenandoah Valley under General Stonewall Jackson. And it was in Port Republic that I met my maker in the spring of '62. Well, I don't remember how we ended up coming back to Minden.
I remember that story well. After the war, we learned that the boys were buried in a very shallow trench in Virginia. And my son, Tom Creighton, the boy's brother, managed to get a horse and a somewhat good wagon and went all the way to Virginia and found the boys and brought them back to Minden for their final resting place here and for their place in Minden's history.
When I was a little baby, my mama rocked me in the cradle in them old cotton fields at home. When I was a little baby, my mama rocked me in the cradle in them old cotton fields at home. Oh, when the cotton rolls get ripe, you can't pick very much cotton in them old cotton fields at home. It was down in Louisiana, 12 miles from Texarkana, in them old cotton fields at home. I was poor in Arkansas, people asked me what you come here for, in them old cotton fields at home. I was poor in Arkansas, people asked me what you come here for, in them old cotton fields at home.
Hello, welcome on this special day of November the 11th. I was here when it became special. I'm Carol Hunter, well, I'm George Carol Hunter to be exact, and I was there in France on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month when armistice took effect. In fact, I'm still in France. I never made it back to Minden. My family did erect this marker right back here in my memory, and I was a rather handsome fellow, as you can tell by looking at that picture. I was a lieutenant in the United States Army, serving on the front lines of combat. It was a great day there. I'm not sure what it's like to be back here in Minden. Let's ask my brother Larry. Larry, do you remember what it was like?
I wasn't here either, Carol. I was off in the Army, serving my country. I wasn't in France, but I did serve my country.
I forgot that, Larry. You're so involved here in Minden. It just seems natural to imagine that you were here. Anyway, it was quite a celebration that night in Paris. I was so happy and I was so glad to be alive. I had a great time with my girlfriend. She was French, and I was looking forward to some wonderful times with her.
Carol, your girlfriend wrote us several times telling us about you and your times in France.
I really didn't know those things. Things happened so quickly and I'd forgotten. See, I didn't get to celebrate the victory too long. I came down with the Spanish flu a short time after Armistice, and on Christmas Day, it eventually got to me. That was back in 1918. I passed away in Paris. That was a long way from Minden.
It certainly changed our father's plans. It was such a shock to him. He had planned for you to run the North Louisiana Bottling Company, which is now Coca-Cola of Minden. After your death, our stepmother had to run it until I was able to take over and run the company.
I understand that, Larry, but that was still a great day in Minden. Tell us about the baseball, the playhouse, Larry. They need to know about some of those things.
Well, we don't need to go into that today. We need to do that some other time. Today we need to remember the significance of November the 11th. It was the end of the Great War. You and I both gave up our lives here in Minden, and you ended up losing your life. But I think it was worth it for all of us to serve and for our nation. We want to give everyone a Coca-Cola. So everybody come by and get a Coca-Cola. These are compliments of the Hunter family who still operates the Coca-Cola company across the street.
You know, next year we're gonna, Larry's gonna be here with his father, W.S. This is the first and second generation buried here. The third generation is right across the street in the other cemetery. And the reason they're buried over there is so that they can keep an eye on the family-owned business that's still in operation today, the Minden Coca-Cola plant. So y'all help yourself to a Coke. There's some pictures up here. There's a photograph album if y'all want to flip through there real quick and look at some things. You want to take a six-pack?
I'll get you one that over. One better, one less.
Well, it's still over there, and this is the building that was in
We
1903.
get one for you if you want this bigger.
These are 1923 figures.
Carol from France, see, they've got a one in the back where they can, you know.
I'd go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Mackey Mace. I'm not a Southerner. I was born in Pennsylvania to parents from Vermont, of all places. They moved to Warsaw when I was a child, around 1840. Warsaw is what you know as Minden now. Actually, our land was what's the farm now, out on Townsend Street. It was a good time to be here. It was an exciting time to live in this town, in this place. There were people moving in from all over. I married a wonderful young man named Alexander Mackey, but just about that time, terrible things happened. The war came, and Alexander went away to war. I cannot even now bear to remember. When our son was born, he had already been killed. He was serving with the Minden Blues with Robert E. Lee in Virginia. So we never saw our son. It was a terrible time for me. I was more lucky than most, though, because I had a house, and I had a mother, but I had a baby, and I was so frightened. But you know, I managed. I was becoming quite confident at taking care of myself, but there were things that were difficult. One of the things that I must tell you about where we lived, though, where our house was, right across from our house was a quartermaster depot. It was a sort of a staging deployment area for Confederate troops that were passing through the area. Hundreds, even thousands of troops passed through the area because they were being sent all over the area. So it was an interesting place to have my house right across the street from there. But anyway, one day I was really having trouble with my water well, and I was out trying to get water, and I could not get the pulley to work. that I was quite capable of taking care of myself. I had become quite confident at tending to my own stuff, but he was very sure that he could do it better than I could. No, let me do it, ma'am. You should not be doing that hard work. So he climbed up on the ledge of the well. Guess what? He fell and he broke his leg. I was a little pleased at that, but not really pleased, just a little amused because he'd been so arrogant about being able to do it himself. In any case, there was no hospital for the soldiers across the way because it was just a staging depot. But there was a surgeon there, and he set the leg, but it was a terrible break. And he said there's no way he can go on with the Army. It's going to be months before he can be of any value to anybody. So there was nothing for him to do but stay at my house. So I took him in. I did have nursing experience, and he lived with us for several months, but I did have my mother for his chaperone. We got to know each other quite well. He was a German. He had immigrated to Shreveport with his family when he was just a teenager. He had become a carriage painter. And then he joined the Red River Cavalry when he was very young and fought all over the Confederacy. But he was captured and he had been a POW and then he had been exchanged. It was just when he was in Minden, he was being sent somewhere else. He was just out of the prison camp. In any case, he did not have to stay in the Army anymore, and that was a good thing. And we had a good marriage. We had another son. We had a son, Lewis, and we were happy until I died in 1885, leaving him with 2 boys and my mother to be responsible for.
Well, I'm Mary Fuller Mace. I was Frederick Mace's second wife, and we didn't have quite as a romantic beginning as Miss Mary here. I was born in 1864, about the time that Frederick Mace made his way to Minden. And my father, John Fuller, came to the Warsaw community in the 1830s, and he met my mother, Mary Brazel, in the 1850s. And we actually lived down the road from the Mace family, and I knew about them. I knew the German immigrants that had come from Prussia. And Frederick Mace was quite a prominent citizen, and he'd served as an alderman for a few terms. And we got married in 1889, and on February the 27th, Judge Harmon Caldwell Drew declared us man and wife, and I was only 23. We would go on to have 4 children. Charles was our oldest, and Maggie and Treby and Dora were our girls, and Maggie was our oldest. Maggie didn't marry. She had many suitors, but took to none. And but she loved children, and she taught Sunday school for 50 years. And I truly believe that it was my older daughter that inspired my sweet granddaughter Zenobia to give our family land to a group of artists. My daughter Dora married Robert Camp, and they had 2 children, Zenobia West and Marjorie. Both of them very talented. Zenobia plays the cello, and Marjorie is an artist and a retired art teacher. But I know that it was Maggie's love for children that inspired Zenobia to give our land. She spent many hours teaching Zenobia how to read. She was the one that would take her to her music lessons. The family property that is so rich in history now serves as what they call a farm, and it's located on the corner of Talbot and East Union. And I understand that these artists every year hold a big festival, and hundreds of children from all of around the area come to paint and dance and sing. And what a wonderful gift to give a community. I am so deeply proud of my granddaughter, and I know that Maggie will be proud too. So this spring I hope that you will visit the farm, because while you're there I'm sure you'll see all the flowers that Dora and I have planted. She loved to garden, I love to cook, and I'm sure you'll see the old shed there too that Dora sold milk out of for extra money. I don't think they managed to keep the old pigeon coop. I love to raise pigeons. I just love those little birds. Anyway, I need to get back to making my cornbread. My granddaughter loves to make cornbread with me. I can just hear her now saying, "Granny, teach me to make cornbread." Well, between me and you, she was better at the cello. Well, I died in 1942 at the age of 78. I had a good life in Minden and lots of great memories. And I'm buried over here. And if you'll notice, the spelling on these headstones are all different. They couldn't spell Mace. So even on Frederick's Confederate papers, it's spelled M-A-C-E. Mary Mackey's is M-A-E-S-S, but the correct spelling is M-O-E-S-S, and it's pronounced Mace, and even today people will call it Moses, and not Mace. So, glad to have you here today, and thank you so much for letting us share
What did you call that?
This is Mace, it's German.
Mace.
Mace.
No way there.
I know.
Okay. Good afternoon. What I'd like to talk to y'all about today is about the 28th Louisiana Infantry Regiment. It's going to seem kind of long, but I'm going to kind of tie it all in. We believe there's between 20 and 25 Confederate soldiers buried in this trench from that end to where the cement ends up here. We only know the name of one of them, and that was a Private Anderson with the 31st Texas Cavalry. And they found out about 7 or 8 years ago that he was buried here, but some of his ancestors found a letter where he said that he was here in a camp in Minden, which is called Camp Magruder, which was behind where the old Minden Market and Walmart building is. They was a camp back there. It was Walker's Texas Division. Division was about 15,000 men, but at that time, Walker probably had about 8,000 men in his division left. They were camped out there during the winter of 1864, and personally, I believe that's where most of these soldiers came from. There's stories around that they came from Pleasant Hill or Mansfield battlefield, which may or may not be true. I don't believe it is, because if they were injured there, they wouldn't have brought them 75 miles to Minden, you know, just to bury them. They would have buried them somewhere closer to Mansfield or maybe the Shreveport area. But the 20th Louisiana Infantry Regiment was organized at Monroe in 1862 with 902 men. They moved to Vienna and drilled there for several months before going to the camp near Milliken's Bend. In November, they received orders to report to General Richard Taylor in South Louisiana. They were in camp at Avery Island for a short while, then moved to Fort Bisland near Centerville. On March 28, 1863, a detachment helped capture the Federal gunboat Diana in a skirmish on the Atchafalaya River. The regiment fought in the Battle of Fort Bisland, April 12 and 13, instrumental in the Confederate victory at Irish Bend. With Taylor's army, they then retreated to Natchitoches, but returned to South Louisiana in June. The brigade marched to Monroe in November, and Company A, H, and D of the 28th were sent to Camp Magruder near Minden to join Walker's Texas Division. This is where I believe these soldiers that are buried here died of disease or maybe wounds. Or back then, if you got a disease, there was very little medicine. So if you got diarrhea or you got scurvy or something like that, there was no cure for it. If you didn't make it on your own, there was no medicine to really help you. So you more or less died. The 28th left Magruder in January 1864 when the Federals began marching up the Red River in mid-March. They crossed over Alexandria and began retreating towards Natchitoches. The regiment distinguished itself in the Confederate attack at the Battle of Mansfield, April 8th. During the Battle of Pleasant Hill, April 9th, the brigade remained in reserve until late in the day and saw very little fighting. The regiment participated in the Battle of Yellow Bayou, which is below Natchitoches, May 18th, and again suffered numerous casualties. In August, they marched to Monroe, and from there went into southern Arkansas until late in the year. They then returned to Alexandria via Minden. They then marched to Mansfield, where the men disbanded on May 19, 1865, just prior to the surrender of the Trans-Mississippi Department. Today being Veterans Day, I'd like to leave y'all with a little short story. I didn't find this out until about 5 or 6 years ago. It's the story of taps. The time was 1862 during the Civil War when Union Army Captain Robert Ellicombe was with his men near Harrison's Landing in Virginia. The Confederate Army was on the other side of the narrow strip of land. During the night, Captain Ellicombe heard the moan of a soldier who lay mortally wounded on the battlefield. Not knowing if it was a Union or Confederate soldier, he decided to risk his own life and crawled on his stomach out across the field to retrieve the soldier. The captain reached the stricken soldier and began pulling him towards his encampment. When the captain finally reached his own lines, he discovered it was actually a Confederate soldier and not a Union soldier, but the soldier was dead.
The captain lit a lantern. Suddenly, he caught his breath and went numb with shock. In the dim light, he saw the face of the soldier. It was his captain's own son. His son had been studying music in the South when the war broke out and had decided to join the Confederate Army without telling his father. The following morning, heartbroken, the father asked permission of his superiors to have a full military burial despite the boy being an enemy soldier. The request was partially granted. The captain asked if he could have a group of Army band members play a funeral dirge for the son at the funeral. That request was turned down since the soldier was a Confederate. Out of respect for the father, they did say he could have a musician. The captain chose a bugler. He asked the bugler to play a series of musical notes he had found on a piece of paper in the pocket of his dead son's uniform. This wish was granted. The music was a haunting melody we now know as taps that is used at all military funerals. These are the words to taps. Day is done, gone is the sun. From the lakes, from the hills, from the sky, all is well, safely rest, God is nigh. God bless America, and thank y'all.
A little over 100 years. Well, we've got y'all all gathered up here, and we want to welcome you. Y'all should know by now they saved the best part of the tour for the end. And I'm Nicholas J. Sandlin. I've been out here just over 100 years now. And it just seems like yesterday that my family sent me to Louisiana and North Carolina to live with my aunt and uncle, Calvin and Leslie Leary. They had a large plantation east of Minden called Sunnyside Plantation, near what y'all call Dubberly today, and it's called the Shadow Place now. But my Uncle Calvin helped me get started in business in 1859 by starting a newspaper, the Minden Advertiser. And while I was publishing the paper, I had a real interest in law and politics and making sure that things got done right. And I would study law at night after I finished publishing the paper. But in 1861, my studies were interrupted by a conflict known as the Civil War. And in April 1861, myself and many others from Minden, we formed the Minden Blues, and we had these nice-looking blue uniforms, and we marched off to join the Army of Northern Virginia. We were proud of our unit, we were proud of our blue uniforms, and we were just as proud to burn those uniforms after the first Battle of Manassas when the other Confederate forces fired on us for not having the right color uniform. We fought with the Army of Northern Virginia for 4 years. We were at Appomattox Courthouse when Lee surrendered to Grant. There were only 7 members of our unit left at that time. Our whole unit was captured once in 1863, and we participated in all the major battles like Gettysburg and Sharpsburg. Our unit elected me as a captain after the surrender, which just really meant I led the long walk home back to Minden. But when I got back to Minden, I got involved in law and politics again and was elected district attorney for the entire region between the Red and the Washita River. After I served as district attorney, my wife and I started a family. We raised 2 sons, one named Mac, who was mayor of Minden before he was age 25. He went on to serve as tax assessor here in Webster Parish for 28 years, and it was said of him that everybody in Webster Parish knew my son Mac. But now my son John, who's buried right here, he outdid us all. He started out as district attorney like I did. Then he was elected district judge, and he went on to serve in Congress and served 16 years until some fella from Winfield named Long ran against him. And he had to come back to Minden. But once my boys got grown, I got back into politics again. I served as the postmaster in Minden, served in the state legislature, and I was on the Minden City Council when I died and came out here. And our family has been involved in the life of Minden for many, many years. My son John built a beautiful home that was up on Broadway, where our home stood is now a parking lot for the First Baptist Church for their Family Life Center. And I want y'all to know I'm looking for a fellow they call T.C. Bloxam, because I've been told that he gave an impassioned speech to the deacon body at that church years ago. The church actually owned that old house, And he told those deacons that he had debatted that house, he had defleed it, he had deliced it, and the time had come for him to destroy it and to make room for a parking lot. And if y'all see him, you tell him Nick Sandlin wants to talk to him. Thank you for being here today and enjoy your visit.
Just right there.
Must be around here somewhere. Oh, hello. I'm Mary Smith. I was buried in this cemetery on April 22nd, 1840. Although I was first buried around Merle's Tan Yard. But I believe you might know it today as Kirby Place or something like that. I bet you're wondering why I was moved around so much. Well, it was Charles Beaver. He's the founder of this town. He's the one that requested I be moved. Surely today you don't allow people to just be moved wherever like that. If only he'd let me stay where I was put. Now I can't even find my grave. If only I could find it. You haven't seen it, have you?
I think it's right behind you.
Could you look for it for me, please? A marker or anything?
Yeah.
Must be around here somewhere.